Dear participants, welcome to IUCN Global Youth Summit, and thanks so much for choosing our track, a New Deal for Nature Model Environmental Ministerial Summit. My name is Zheng Kailai from WWF China, and I will be the facilitator of today's session. And it is my great honor to introduce the distinguished organizer of this event, Kotoko Yadomaru, Mizuho Shibasaki, Maki Kodama, Ryo Toyoshima, from Change Our Next Decade from Japan. And I hope my pronunciation is correct. And please forgive me if it's not that correct. And we also have Shen Shiyao and Xu Hangming from WWF China. And this event, as you can see, is completely organized by youth from both Japan and China. And we welcome all the participants, youth participants. We welcome all of you to our event. We hope that you are all excited as we are about today's discussion. So our event will have two parts actually, with our today's session exclusively focusing on the resource mobilization on biodiversity. And tomorrow evening at the same time, we will have another discussion related to climate change. And so this is our agenda of today. First, we will hear the opening remarks from our distinguished guest, Ambassador Masahiko Horie. And then we will hear the capacity building lecture from Kotoko from Change Our Next Decade. And in the meantime, we, the staff and organizers, will put all of you participants randomly into 5 regional groups, namely the Asia Pacific, the Africa, the Eastern Europe, the Western Europe and others, Latin America and Caribbean. And we will add those regional names into your group name. And later when you are having the free discussion yourself, you're supposed to speak for the regional interests of your regional groups and have an in-depth discussion and exchange of ideas about the resource mobilization of biodiversity conservation. And the results of your discussion, let's hope that everything goes well. The results of the discussion will be recorded as the consensus framework of our event. Now, without further ado, let's kickstart our event with our distinguished guest, Ambassador Horie, to deliver his opening remarks. Welcome, Ambassador Horie.
Bruce. Do you listen? 大家好
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you.
我是日本的大使 Masahiko Horie。今天晚上我非常高兴能见到各位来自很多的青年朋友们。As I spoke in my poor Chinese, I'm very happy in speaking to all the young people this evening. My special thanks goes to Ms. Li Nan, Director of WWF China, as well as Kotoko Yadomaru, who is the head of Change Our Next Decade. Is everyone looking at my face or only voice? I see. And, both WWF China and Change Our Next Decade have made this interesting and wonderful meeting tonight. And when I heard the theme of two-day conference, a new deal for youth and nature, wonderful theme. And you're going to do it with Model Environment Ministers Summit. And when you are dealing with biodiversity today, and tomorrow climate change, that made me think of 2 very, very important speeches which have been done by 2 young girls. First one is 1992, almost 29 years ago, almost 3 decades ago, one speech by a 12-year-old lady named Sevan Suzuki. She made her speech at Rio de Janeiro when United Nations Conference on Environment and Development took place, Earth Summit. Second one is Greta Thunberg. When she was 16 years old, she made it in New York at the United Nations Climate Summit. I regret that I cannot see many faces at all other than Bruce because of the limitation of technical limitation of Zoom. How many of you know Greta? Please raise your hand who know Greta. Okay, many of you. Who listened to her speech made in 2019? A bit less. Who read the text by Greta Thunberg, her speech, which lasted about 4 minutes or so? Could be a bit less. Who knows Sevan Suzuki? Raise your hand. Not many, very few. Because she spoke almost 30 years ago, before you were born, most of you. That may be the reason. But both Sevan in 1992 and Greta 2 years ago, two young girls accused all the world leaders at the United Nations. She criticized and accused all the leaders of the world for their inaction or half measures. So tonight, very few of you know Sevan Suzuki. Let me introduce some highlights of Sevan Suzuki's speech. Okay, it goes this way. I am Sevan Suzuki, speaking for Environmental Children's Organization. We raised all the money ourselves to come all the way 6,000 miles to Rio de Janeiro to tell you, adults, you must change your ways. I am fighting for my future. I am here to speak for the countless animals dying across this planet. Animals and plants are going to extinct every day, vanishing forever. Now I wonder if they will even exist for my children to see. And all this is happening before our eyes, and yet you act as if we have enough time we want, and we have all the solutions, as if. But you don't know how to bring back an animal now extinct. If you don't know how to fix it, and you cannot bring back forests that once grew, but now all desert. If you don't know how to fix it, please stop devastating it, destroying it. In my anger and in my fear, I am not afraid to tell you the word how I feel. Don't forget why you are here to attend these conferences. I don't think you can say to us anymore, like, we are doing best we can. Everything is all right, going to be all right. I challenge you. Please make your actions reflect your own words. This is the highlights of the speech by Seven, 12-year-old girl coming from Canada. Very strong. And everyone, all the leaders of the world, including environment ministers, they were moved and they thought they have to scale up their actions for nature conservation. Seven struck a chord for nature conservation of all the audience. But after her speech, 3 decades, do you think Seven succeeded in making a difference? What is your answer? My answer is not much. Not much during the last 30 years time, because biodiversity loss is accelerating and climate change, global warming is getting worse and worse, and United Nations Secretary General is telling no longer climate change, that climate emergency. Maybe tonight you're going to discuss about biodiversity. And my message to you is why 30 years ago, Seven's speech, everybody must have been moved and they were, resonated emotionally to work and to make actions. But not much changed during the last 30 years time. Why is it so? That is my big question to you. Take, for instance, another one during the last 10 years time. 10 years time means starting 2010, when CBD's COP10 took place in Nagoya, Aichi, Japan. Everybody agreed upon Aichi targets, 20 targets. 10 years, 1 decade passed. How much did we succeed in achieving these 20 targets? Roughly speaking, only 10%, only about 10% of 20 Aichi targets have been achieved. 90%, not very well. So I hope, are you going to repeat this again? Another 30 years until 2050? I hope you young environment ministers will discuss how to overcome this difficulty, how to change our course, lifestyle, and how we, can cope with the situation, catastrophic ones. Every country, each country has their own circumstances. Level of poverty level, different. Financial constraints, different from one country to another. All countries have its own situation. And you, environment ministers, young ones, you are appointed, chosen by your prime minister and your president. So all your efforts would be dependent on the political priority of your president and your prime minister who appointed you. Under these circumstances, nonetheless, we have to safeguard our planet and we have to protect our biodiversity. If you may, I'd like to share 2 slides And can you make me possible to share my documents? I'm not allowed. Bruce, can you do it?
Yes, Ambassador, we're doing it right now.
Okay, now it's okay. All right. Where did it go? Can you see?
Yes, Ambassador, but we can only see a very small section of the screen. And now it's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, we can see it now.
Global Youth Summit, collaboration between WWF China and COND Japan, a new deal for youth and nature. You know, this is the scientific data offered by WWF. And when the population grows over 7 billion people on this planet, extinction of wildlife increases as much as the population of human beings. And this is because of we human beings have been developing and we are invading the area where wildlife, these animals are living. 76% of freshwater species extinct, 39% terrestrial species, 39% marine species. And overall, 52% have been in decline since 1920 to 2010. And Mr. Rockstrom, scientist in Sweden and now in Potsdam, he has shown this important, planetary boundaries. I think many of you know this, have seen it many times. These important things to keep our planet safe and sound, we have to keep everything within this green circle. But look at this climate change. It's exceeding this yellow donut, no, green donut, and red. Climate change is in peril. Global warming is in emergency situation. But look, nitrogen cycle. I think very few people know what's happening nitrogen cycle. It's very bad. And nitrogen cycle is very, very important for human beings, not only human beings, but all creatures with life. Our creature's life dependent on nitrogen cycle. This is very alarming and a lot more serious than climate change. Now, biodiversity loss. This is even in comparison with climate change or emergency. This is a exceedingly very bad situation. So I hope all the environment ministers from the world, I hope you will work so that whether, to find out solutions and try to see how that will be possible. And not only from the perspective of environment ministers, but also as youth, please come to a good conclusion with constructive solution, constructive way to present to the adults and to all the people in the world to reach in 3 decades time the vision of living in harmony with nature. And for that one, everybody knows we need fundamental transformative change, which must be fundamental one. Nelson Mandela, when he was president of South Africa, he urged old grown-ups with gray hair to engage young people more meaningfully in nature conservation. He urged old people, adults, for better engagement with youth, because he knew without the involvement of youth, the future cannot be secured. The future is not in our hands, old ones, but the future is in your hands, in the hands of all the young people. I hope today's meeting and tomorrow's meeting will be meaningful and good ones for you to make more actions and issuing a lot more constructive and good messages to peoples of the world, and between WWF China and Change Our Next Decade Japan, to work on the, maybe produce a good joint project between you two. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Huri. Though my Japanese cannot be possibly as good as your Mandarin, but I will still have to say arigatou gozaimashita.
どういたしまして。Thank you.
Thank you so much. Your remarks are indeed very inspiring for our young people, and it's really important for us to shoulder our social responsibility, even though we're still very young, and to learn from inspiring figures from you, and to take part in activities such as the one that we're undertaking right now, and equip ourselves with the knowledge and skills in order to better protect our planet in the future when we are in that position to do so. Thank you so much, Ambassador Huri.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you. And now we will welcome Kotoko to introduce the topic of our discussion today, which is the resource mobilization of biodiversity. Welcome, Kotoko.
Thank you, Bruce. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, thank you. I will share my screen. So give me a sec. Can you see my screen? Okay. Bruce. Okay. Okay, so let's start to, hi, thank you so much, Bruce, and thank you so much opening remarks, the Ambassador Horie. Hi, everyone, good morning, good evening. Welcome to our track. I'm Kotoko Yadomaru from Change Our Next Decade, called Kondo in Japan. I'd like to briefly explain about the topics, our discussion topics, the resource mobilization, and the related some materials, and so on. There are resources in the chat box, so please read them as well. I hope this capacity building session will help to consider your opinion and the statement at the discussion later. My presentation has three contents: the introduction, discussion topic, and the key questions. So let's move on to the introduction section. In this introduction section, I will introduce about the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Conference of the Parties and the IG biodiversity targets and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and its preparatory process for the negotiation process. The first, what is the Convention on Biological Diversity? It's called CBD. This is the one of the Environmental Framework Convention. This convention entered into force on the 29th December 1993. The UNFCCC, which was adopted at the same time, called the Twin Convention. And there are 194 parties as of 2018, but the United States has not signed up. This convention has three objectives. The first is the conservation of biological diversity. The second is the sustainable use of the components of biological diversity. The third is the fair and equitable sharing of the benefit arising out of the utilization of genetic resources. To make it short, the conservation and sustainable use and access and benefit sharing. It's called ABS. The next, what is the Conference of the Parties? This is the governing body of the convention. It is held every 2 years in the CBD. The frequency of the meeting varies depending on the convention. For example, the UNSCCC COP has held every year. In the CBD COP, around 30 agenda items are discussed and negotiated over a period of 2 weeks. It has a lot of agenda items such as protected areas and OECM, wildlife management, marine and coastal biodiversity, mainstreaming, synthetic biology, resource mobilization, capacity building, communication, and so on. So much agenda. The 15th Conference of the Parties, the next COP of CBD, is expected to adopt the next global goal, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The next one is the Aichi Biodiversity Targets. So what is this? The CBD has the 2011-2020 Biodiversity Strategic Plan, which was adopted at the CBD COP10 held in Aichi, Japan. This strategic plan included the vision for 2050, living in harmony with nature, and also it has 2020 mission, which is take effective and urgent action to halt the loss of biodiversity in order to ensure that by 2020, ecosystems are resilient and continue to provide essential services, thereby securing the planet's variety of life and contributing to human well-being and poverty eradication. To achieve this 2020 mission, the parties developed the 20 action targets, which were adopted at the COP10 in Aichi and are known as the Aichi Biodiversity Targets. These targets are divided into 5 strategic goals. The strategic goal A, that address the underlying causes of biodiversity loss by mainstreaming biodiversity across government and society. The strategic goal B, reduce the direct pressures on biodiversity and promote sustainable use. The strategic goal C, to improve the status of biodiversity by safeguarding ecosystems, species, and genetic diversity. Strategic Goal D, enhance the benefits to all from biodiversity and ecosystem services. Strategic Goal E, enhance implementation through participatory planning, knowledge management, and capacity building. And now, the parties are negotiating on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The Aichi biodiversity targets, which were to achieve by 2020, have reached their deadline. The post-2020 framework is currently being negotiated as a global framework for the next 10 years after the Aichi biodiversity targets. And as I mentioned, the 15th Conference of the Parties, CBD COP15, is expected to adopt this. Here is the construction of post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework now. It still has 2050 vision, living in harmony with nature, and there are 2050 goals and 2030 milestones to achieve the 2050 vision clearly. Also, it has 2030 mission. The components are tool and solution, reducing threats and meeting people needs. And it recognized need for the support system of implementation, such as responsibility and transparency, enabling conditions, means of implementation. Regarding the preparatory process of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, in CBD's decisions 14/34, The COP adopted a comprehensive and preparatory process for it. It has a lot of keywords such as participatory, inclusive, transformative, knowledge-based, gender responsibility, visible, flexibility, and so on. Regional and thematic workshop, the 3 times of the open-ended working groups, and subsidiary body meetings are being held to discuss the COP15. So now let's move on to the today's focusing discussion topics, resource mobilization. This section includes the background, the relevant age targets of the resource mobilization, and negotiating on the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. First, what is the resource mobilization? Resource mobilization is a discussion on how to secure resources such as people, materials, and money in order to strengthen implementation to achieve the 3 objectives of the CBD. In addition to securing funds, technical elements such as capacity building, technology transfer, and scientific and technological cooperation are also important for biodiversity conservation. This is very important for the implementation of under the CBD. This is an issue that can easily create conflicting structures between those who receive funds and those who contribute, and between those who train capacity building and technology transfer and those who do not. And in this slide, I introduced 2 financial mechanisms, the Japan Biodiversity Fund and the Global Environment Facility. The Japan Fund for the Biodiversity was established by the Secretariat of CBD as part of the COP10 presidency of Japan with the aim of building the capacity of developing countries to achieve the Aichi biodiversity targets. A total of 5 billion yen was contributed in FY 2010 and FY 2011. Actually, it uses capacity building not only in developing countries but also use capacity training. On the other hand, the Global Environment Facility is the financial mechanisms of the Convention on Biological Diversity. Between 2006 to 2010 and 2018 to 2022, funding directly relevant to biodiversity provided through the JEF increased by more than 30%, reaching about $1.3 billion. Further, the amount of other biodiversity relevant investments has also increased over this period. The funding period through the JEF has leveraged an additional $323 million per year between 2015 and 2017 in private co-financing. The most relevant age target of the resource mobilization is Target 20. Financial resources from all sources increased, enhanced implementation through participatory planning, knowledge management, and capacity building. The full sentence of age Target 20 is in the blue box. By 2020, at the latest, the mobilization of financial resources for effectively implementing the strategic plan for biodiversity 2011-2020 from all sources, and in accordance with the consolidated and agreed process in the strategic for resource mobilization, should increase substantially from the current levels. This target will be subject to changes contingent to resource needs assessment to be developed and reported by parties. And also, in the review of the Global Biodiversity Outlook 5th edition called GBO5, the summary of the Target 20 review is there have been increases in domestic resources for biodiversity in some countries, with resources remaining broadly constant for others over the past decade. Financial resources available for biodiversity through international flows and official development assistance has roughly doubled. However, when all sources of biodiversity finance are taken into account, the increase in biodiversity financing would not appear to be sufficient in relation to needs. They are currently negotiating on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, the draft Target 18 on the updated of the zero draft of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework document is relevant to resource mobilization. It is in C, Tools and Solutions for Implementation and Mainstreaming, as I mentioned before in the figure. This draft target is the by 2030 increase by X% financial resources from all international and domestic sources through new, additional, and effective financial resources commensurate with the ambition of the goals and targets of the framework and implement the strategy for capacity building and technology transfer and scientific cooperation to meet the need for implementing the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Finally, we provide you some key questions. Making answers for these questions is not mandatory in this session. So if you already have some comments or statements, please speak it. But if you do not, please use these questions when thinking about your opinion or recommendations. The question number 1 is which position does your model regional group have for this draft target 18 and why? The question number 2 is if you agree with this draft target 18, what do you think about the appropriate number for X%? The question number 3, if you neutral or disagree with this draft target 18, what assumption or modification would make you agree with this draft target? The final question is do you want to add or delete some words or sentences, including minor changes? So please consider about your opinion or recommendation as a representative of the regional groups. Finally, prepare for the discussion. After my presentation, you have 10 minutes to consider your statement as a regional group representative individually. So please read this document in Google Drive or it is sent in the chat box and think of your model regional group's position. From the page 12, the regional group summary from report of the regional consultation workshop in 2019. So please read this and please consider about your positions. That's all for my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you so much, Kodako, for such an informative introduction on our topic. And now our participants, you have around, as we mentioned, you have around 10 minutes to clarify your regional position on this topic. And around 10 minutes later, we're going to have the most exciting part of our track, which is the discussion among yourself about your opinions about the stances of all regions on the subject of resource mobilization. Hi everyone, welcome back. We're afraid that the time for your reading has run out. And of course, the next hour will be entirely yours. And now it's your chance to voice the interests and stances of your region, the one that you're representing in this event. And those of you who would like to speak, please press the button of raise your hand. And I can invite you to unmute yourself, or you can, or I will read your name and you can unmute yourself. Either way is okay. And since the total time of our discussion is actually quite limited, it's about an hour. So please do not speak for too long. Around 1 to 2 minutes is okay, but please do not speak for too long. Okay. And now those of you who like to share with us your opinion regarding the status quo of the resource mobilization, like some existing mechanisms, like what we mentioned, the GEF, Japan Fund for Biodiversity, those existing mechanisms of resource mobilization, but perhaps more importantly on the future of resource mobilization, as we have introduced in the zero draft of global biodiversity framework post 2020. The target 18 is to increase the financial resources and build some additional financial mechanisms in order to match the ambition and goals of post-2020 global biodiversity framework. So what do you think about the status quo and the future of resource mobilization? We would love to hear your opinion. Those of you who would like to speak, please just raise your hand and unmute yourself. Well, it seems that the environmental minister in our event is a little bit shy right now.
Hi, sorry, I just go first then. Can you hear me?
Sure. Great.
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm not so familiar with that topic, so but I just had a look at the draft and took some notes. And I mean, I think so. I've represented Central and Eastern Europe, and there was a big issue about public awareness and awareness of policymakers about the importance of allowing for resource mobilization. And my personal thoughts were that I think that the general public should maybe be involved a bit more in these decisions, and that I feel like it's always a bubble. So people that are interested in that area will get to the information. They will get the advertisements on Google and Facebook on all these pages. But if you're not necessarily interested in this, you're not really confronted with that topic. So I personally think a big change needs to happen towards raising the awareness of the general public, maybe by like I personally think that maybe Google or all these internet sources we use have a big impact, because if you pay a lot of money, you get your commercial. I think that's how big companies do it. And then the more people they see it, the more the people get, the more awareness has been raised, and the more funds are also being collected, I guess. So I think these would be some more modern ways that could be used to get the awareness of the public, and then also put pressure on the politicians and policymakers to actually implement these issues. And I think, yeah, I didn't like, basically my document just said there is an insufficient awareness of raising activities. So I also think if it comes up to campaigns that are about these topics, it's more, you know, it happens in zoos, museums, or things like that. It's always targeted to people that already have an interest. So I think something must happen to just get more exposure and yeah, just improve the awareness of the significance of these topics, that will then hopefully also you know, start putting the pressure more towards driving this way. Yeah.
Well, thank you
Any
so
other
much.
comments of anyone else?
Yes, thank you so much. And we would like to welcome Samantha from representing Africa.
Thank you so much. I'm originally from Zimbabwe, but I live in Switzerland. And my contribution mainly is based in conservation areas like protected national parks or protected areas within Southern Africa. I think in terms of resource mobilization, there's a lot of resources, specifically money, that's injected into things like climate change, for instance, right? And conservation or the protection of biodiversity. And there are a lot of organizations that work towards almost similar goals, but these organizations do not communicate. And I think if there was a way to maybe build capacity within these organizations to link up or to communicate so that they can mobilize their resources together towards these goals, it would make such a difference. Because in some situations, you get a lot of organizations in the same area doing the same thing, but are not creating a meaningful impact, especially within the communities. And specifically around the youth, I think there needs to be intergenerational dialogue between the older generation and younger, and the younger generation, us, where we're respected and heard, specifically because I'm not speaking for the whole continent because it's not homogeneous, but within some of African cultures, the young people are not seen as wise or knowledgeable. And so therefore, the impact or contribution that we can make within such spaces, especially around resources and how to use them, is not necessarily heard. And so I think if these two things could be worked on, especially within the community on the grassroots level, it could make a difference, especially for resource mobilization, where an impact is felt and where implementation matters. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I absolutely agree that the communication and collaboration between organizations of the similar capacity is really crucial. After all, this is how we can have today's event. Now let's invite a participant representing Asia Pacific.
Hi, so I had Asia Pacific, and basically what it was saying, the biggest thing that they were focusing on was that they need relevant funding for biodiversity for the post-2020 period. And they were asking specifically for funding from, for example, from like banks, the private sector, and all of those types of other organizations. And they were also asking for, there's a big need for indicators for resource mobilization. And again, it was talking about the potential role of regional and development banks, the private sector, other sectors, innovative financial mechanisms, biodiversity offsets, and partnerships. So that was highlighted in the respect of the need for indicators. Another thing that it was talking about was the importance of linking biodiversity financing to climate change to help increase resource availability in that connection, and also the need to tap into resources that are already available through government ministries other than those that are related to the environment. I think just the main thing that they were focusing on was the need for a more effective and strategic use of resources. So it was mainly about needing funding and just how to properly use resources to communicate proper resource mobilization. But yeah, I think that's pretty much what it was kind of targeting for Asia and the Pacific.
Well, thank you so much. You have raised a lot of very valuable points. And I think there are several perhaps distinctive groups that we can discuss one by one. The first is about the channels of resources. You mentioned that the private sector, for example, and the second is the synergy between different multilateral environmental agreements like UNFCCC and CBD. And finally is the one, as you mentioned in the end, is to how do we make full use of the resources? How do we supervise and their usage? And so they are a very useful contribution. Thank you so much. Now we recognize a participant from Africa. Welcome.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear
hello,
you.
how are you? Yes, thank you. So I'm so happy to be with you on this meeting. So I'm so happy. I'm Innocent Antoine Reggie from Youth Initiative for Land in Africa. So we are working on rights, youth and women rights on land access. So I need to add, I'm totally agree with Samata, the proposition of Samata. So it's very important to have the dialogue, okay? The dialogue between all the actors who are working on environment or nature sectors. So it's very important. So I want to hand this occasion to tell you that we are right now implementing one project who is 10 million of youths and 10 million of land for desertification. So it's a project who will impact 10 million of people in Africa, and also working on agriculture, working on environment, climate change, so many sectors. So it's very important. So I invite everybody who has some project, the similar project, to come to join us, and together we will implement this project. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, it seems that our participants have raised many very essential points. And can we push them a little bit deeper and further? You've talked about, as you said, the regional implementation, the grassroots mobilization to mobilize the private sector. Can you envision some more specific and concrete mechanisms that will achieve these goals? For example, private sector or the grassroots community. How do we better mobilize them to devote more resources into biodiversity conservation? What do you think?
Okay, so the private sector is very important for us, because we need to have some inputs to develop all of this project, like the plants that we will put on the ground, and like recruitment, you need to work with the private sectors. So many activities, from many activities in this project will be organized with many private sectors in climate change sectors, environment sectors, and another sectors, agriculture sectors also. So I think private sectors is a middle actors for this project. So that is what I can tell about the involvement of the private sectors as far as this is concerned.
Thank you. Now let's welcome Samantha from Africa again.
Thank you. I know I've spoken already, but I just wanted
okay.
to answer your question. I think the private sector, especially within the Southern African context, is very important, specifically because a lot of NGOs work within biodiversity protection. And like I said before, there's a lot of funding going into biodiversity protection, especially for endangered species such as the rhino, the leopard, the wild dog. And these animals are viewed as very important. And usually NGOs work as a sector where they have so much power to influence movements and initiatives around the protection of these animals. So they play a very important role. And I think in mobilizing communities to protect animals, I think there needs to also be more of a focus on how to work within communities, because again, communities are also not homogeneous entities. They're made up of different ages, gender, you know, a lot of factors that make it difficult for, you know, for one organization to work with a community and say, okay, we're mobilizing this community. Perhaps if the private sector, specifically with regards to NGOs that work with biodiversity, were able to pinpoint groups within communities that they can work with to protect certain species, for example, maybe that could be a way in which we could engage with a grassroots level sector, because at the moment, a lot of briefs or a lot of aims speak about the community as a homogeneous entity. And that's very problematic because communities are not the same. And usually the resources then go to a specific group within that community, and they do not penetrate to the rest of the community. And therefore the aims of that conservation initiative become redundant almost. And the protection of that animal then also becomes redundant. Because you then see issues of poaching or problems with between the government and the communities, of which the government can't do everything. Obviously, the communities have to be a part of the process, and there's a lot of literature showing that communities are essential in the protection of biodiversity. I could go on and on, but I'll stop here. Thank you for your question.
Well, thank you so much. We absolutely agree that the implementation and the grassroots community should undertake the responsibility of implementation. They are really the one operating at the root level to protect biodiversity. I just received a message that the participant Joseph from Asia Pacific wants to share with us something.
Hi. So I come from the Philippines. So I'd like, since I'm also representing the Asia Pacific region here in this workshop, so I'd like to share a bit of my experience. So we've been trying to answer the question on how to involve different stakeholders or interest groups more so that they'd be invested in, let's say, nature conservation or environmental conservation and protection. And that's one of the targets of the post-CBD 2020 and other international commitments from our countries, right? So one thing that we've been trying to head start in the Philippines right now is the concept of natural capital accounting. So this is funded by the GEF and working together with the Conservation International. So we are trying to jumpstart natural capital accounting again, which is the concept of putting different values from monetary to aesthetic and spiritual and other values of nature or from nature, and then share those values or teach those values, the importance of those values to those people or communities directly involved in said area. For example, in Palawan. So for example, we're trying to pilot to use Palawan and Davao as a pilot site for this. So I think that's one thing, to further involve different stakeholders and interest groups so that they would be more interested in conserving nature and the environment. So that would be to explain to them in such a way that how as to how they benefit from nature. We have to make them understand. We have to talk their language, to speak their language in a way, so that they'd be interested in working with us, those concerned with protecting nature for the future. Yeah. So I think that's it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your speech. And I really appreciate your mentioning of GEF, because it's really one of the key supporting financial mechanisms for those environmental agreements. And you know that actually right now, the 8th round of replenishment of the GEF funding is actually taking place. So, which means that all countries and donors are discussing like exactly how much to fund for the next round of global environmental facility for the next 4 years. So the negotiation is actually taking place right now. So what is your opinion and your anticipation about perhaps the future of GEF or other financial mechanisms?
Right now, my hope is that the project that's being started here in my country would give a good enough result in the future. I think the project, should it start or should it continue, it would be good for 5 years. So since I was involved in the project, since I was a part-time consultant for a while there, my main, and I worked in the government under the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. So my main concern or my main hope is that the Philippines would be able to produce a good result, so that should the monitoring and evaluation process begin, we would be able to provide GEF a good enough result so that the projects would continue in our country, because the government here doesn't really support biodiversity conservation, even though the laws say that all agencies should have programs, projects, and activities that should support biodiversity conservation. It's in our General Appropriations Act. It's in the annual budgetary allotment. But then, politics happen, and it happens especially in developing countries. So development or moving forward towards sustainable development is really challenging here in the Philippines. So and basic research, since I am also a biologist, I'm also a taxonomist. Basic research is not really supported here in my country. They prefer big buzzwords like genetic studies, molecular stuff. They don't really support me, an ecologist. So I really need support from outside so that me and my colleagues would be heard. And this is a good platform, and GF would be able to provide a platform for us to be able to protect our environment.
Yeah, and we hear you very clearly, and we recognize and we appreciate greatly your expertise and your professionalism and your contribution to the environment in your country and also the global community. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
and now we invite a participant from Latin America.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, so I'm Kemba Jaramogi from Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean. And I've been listening to the discussion, and I think so much similarities across regions when it comes to that slow pace of action in terms of addressing biodiversity conservation. One of the things in my country, Trinidad and Tobago, that we have been seeing is that slow pace of acting, but really quick to sign agreements or put out policies, spend a huge amount of spending on actually creating documents, but not putting things into action, and also not valuing that indigenous community or rural community input when most of the times where biodiversity is being threatened is often based around these communities. So we have so many people making decisions when they don't really know, what's the real emergency, what's the real situation in there. So I think there needs to be a lot more collaboration. Secondly, the diversification of resources. It can't be 80% for administration for aid agency and 20% for actual work done in the field. So those are some of the things that we need to take into consideration. And one more thing, sometimes these overarching funding policies, for example, in my country, we have the Green Fund. When it came about in 2001, most of the companies put money towards it. And then private companies stopped giving grants to smaller NGOs or organizations because they see themselves given to the government and they just tick a box and say they're doing green for the country when money is not really spent in these areas. So sometimes I think, one of the speakers before mentioned looking at monitoring and evaluation. So I think that needs to be key as well.
Thank you for your speech. I really agree that it's very important to evaluate, to assess the effectiveness of the existing framework and financial mechanism. And if we find any ineffectiveness, then we should make some corrections and improvements. Actually, the GEF that we were just discussing, actually, they have a specific, like an independent group to assess its effectiveness. And the report that it publishes says that some of its operations are not that effective. And part of the reason is precisely what we have discussed just now, that their programs are not sustainable enough, either financially or politically. So at the very beginning, they have some initial fundings to kickstart the program, but later they just don't have that continuous funding. So at the very beginning, it looks quite promising, but later it just didn't continue to function as it was designed, as it was anticipated. So yeah, we need those assessment and evaluation and the correction mechanism when we talk about those channels of financial resources. Thank you very much. And since we don't have any following comments regarding previous statements, let me pose to you another, a more grand question. How do you think those, let's say that we have talked about the resource mobilization and we have successfully collected more resources for biodiversity conservation. How do you think we should distribute them? And how do you think we should manage or supervise this fund effectively to prevent any waste or corruption or any mismanagement, to use those precious resources really effectively and sustainably? What do you think about it? Okay, I saw another participant from Asia Pacific. Yes, Marsad. You can unmute yourself and speak.
Oh yeah, hello. Thank you for recognizing me. Yeah, hello everyone. I just wanted to mention I liked everyone's speeches and the work you guys are doing. It's absolutely brilliant. Thank you for this talk. I think based on the question you asked, and because I was going to make a comment earlier on as well, I think a lot to do. And again, I'm currently just a first freshman student, so I might not have as much insight as you guys, but I think in terms of mobilizing the resources and getting actual work done, especially in relatively underdeveloped countries such as Pakistan and India and South Asia or African countries, we have to focus, I think, unfortunately or fortunately simultaneously on depoliticizing a lot of these issues. Because I think when we're talking about these things, right, for example, a good example of this in Pakistan would be the tree plantation projects that were taking place under the current government. Now, the opposition parties were like, all right, this isn't a good idea and everything. We don't want these things. We don't want to, all of a sudden create these random bursts of forest across the country. And it was turned into a political issue when it was inherently not a political issue. So I think NGOs might have a responsibility to sort of dissipate this sort of political tension between issues that are not inherently political. But I think, as one of my friends once told me, or a senior, everything eventually does become political. That's just the nature of the world. So I think if we want to mobilize resources effectively, then we need to sort of tackle, the political nuances that are present in these debates and address them accordingly and make sure that we are as impartial as we can be. And I think we don't need to sort of pacify a lot of parties, right? Because I think we're at this point in time where we don't have enough time. I mean, I think we're either running out of time or we have run out of time, and it's sort of impossible to sort of spoon feed certain political aspects across the world that all right, we'll concede or we will play according to your rules. But at the same time, with regard to their political base, we might need to sort of have very intense or rigorous awareness sessions with regards to how these resources can be mobilized, how we can depoliticize the environment in general. So I think those are my 2 cents on how we can sort of have more effective things. And I think this can only be done by local communities. If we have foreign NGOs that are coming in, and I mean, they have to empower local communities, but if they're doing this work themselves, then there's going to be a lot of backlash. Because there's always going to be this element of, especially in countries that are victim to, colonialism, there's always going to be that element of, all right, why should we take your word for it? You've never really looked out for the greater interest of us. Even if you are an NGO, you're still coming from XX place. Why would we? And that's just an inherent thought I think a lot of people have. And that's why I even asked a question earlier on, which is why I think a lot of NGOs might need to focus a little bit more on empowering these communities, as well as importing their expertise and knowledge to help around. But yeah.
Wow, your speech is really inspiring. I think I really agree that all politics at the end is local politics, and you have to handle those local political nuances in order to really operate there and empower the local community. Thank you very much. And now we recognize a participant representing Eastern Europe.
Oh, hello. Sorry, I'm from West Africa, precisely. Yeah. So my name is Ibrahim Inusa, and I'm calling from northeastern part of Nigeria, and I am a founder of my initiative, Nature Conservation Advocates for Climate Initiative, where we advocate to the young people and coming from the most vulnerable part of the country, and also advocating to our vulnerable communities, looking at the urgency and the emergencies around the environment and the climate catastrophe that has been destroying our communities here, losing their farms to desertification and getting low yields from their farmlands. And so we are trying to see how we can advocate to them to rethink how they farm, how they can stop deforestation due to the high demand of fuel woods. And these are among what I do. And coming to our conversation, I actually agree with the last speaker, and concerning the politicizing the environmental negotiation and localizing them, because I can reference the first UNIA 5 United Nations Environment Assembly that took place in the February, and decisions have been taken and some have been shifted to next year 5.2 UNIA 5.2. So you see this, the political boundaries have been how can I put it, hijacking, or they are slowing the emergency situation we're in, and we just need to act fast. So I agree with this, and yes, localizing, looking at the inclusion aspect and how we can supervise the mobilized fund effectively. I think yes, we have to come back to the grassroots inclusion, because if we can fund the grassroots directly, maybe grassroots NGOs that are already doing things on ground, because protecting biodiversity at the forefront communities can not only protect the biodiversity, but can also enhance the livelihood of the people that have been suffering from all sort of unsustainable lives. So yes, this just little I just want to say. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for your informative speech and your real experiences. It's very valuable for us. And we see that the participant Will Harris from representing Asia Pacific has been raising hand for a long time. So we would invite Will Harris to share his opinion.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Will Harris. I'm from Wales in the UK. And my suggestion for resource mobilization would be to employ local experts in conservation to be able to oversee resource management for these projects, because I believe that by employing the local experts, they are the people best equipped to distribute the resources and the money to these grassroots projects where the biodiversity will really be taking place. And I think in addition to this, there needs to be auditing and accountability of the companies that will be overseeing these projects, and just making sure that these resources are being allocated to the right places. And if they're not, that there needs to be like these systems in place so that they can actually get back to doing what they're supposed to be doing. And I think if you frame it in a way that this contributes to sustainable development, then these companies are more likely to want to keep funding these projects as well. Yeah, thank you again.
Well, thank you for the speech. We really agree that we need solutions that are suited and that are helpful to the local situation. And we see that Paul from representing Asia Pacific has also been raising his hand for a long time. So let's invite.
All right, thank you. I think it's really enlightening for me. So I'm just a first year student at the African Leadership University. But then with regards to your question on how we could utilize these resources that have been mobilized for conservation, I personally think there is a how we could ensure that we do not just mobilize these resources are also utilized effectively. And I think one way this could be possible is if we advocate for a more centralized distribution system, where when these resources are mobilized, we only whoever is in charge of the funds would not allocate them in a holistic manner, right? So we would only allocate resources per time relative to how much of the project you've actually implemented within a particular period of time, and then the proceedings of the funding can only come towards your direction as you progress along the regional plan. So we wouldn't have an allocation of 5 million to someone or to a particular area without having observed let's say significant improvement based on the previous funding. So more like a stratified allocation system where we get to give you more funding relative to how much implementation we've observed over a period of time. So, and also in order for this to actually make sense, we have to ensure that the communities with highest needs are identified first, and then a chart is developed. So before we even get to mobilize the fund, we have a clear picture of what exactly we intend to achieve within a particular period of time. And then relative to how much is being achieved based on that particular target, we then allocate resources. Resources are then allocated for implementation. Based on this, we wouldn't have to allocate a huge sum of money to a particular region where during the check back process, realize that less than 10% of the money was really utilized for that particular project. So based on how much of the resources were utilized per unit time, the resources then should be allocated more to those regions based on need-based assessment. Thank you.
Thank you for your speech. We see that Joseph from Asia Pacific has been trying to speak. So we will invite him. And after him, we will invite Dauda from representing Africa.
Yeah, hi. I'd love depoliticization or depoliticizing the resource allocation or mobilization of funds for conservation projects. However, let me be a little bit of a devil's advocate here. It doesn't really work that way, or it's really hard for it to work that way because, for example, the funds from international parties like the GF would really pass through or would have to pass through the government. So, for example, at the Philippines, since we are an archipelagic country, what we do is the GF passes through the national government, and then it passes through the regional government, and then it passes through the subnational units further, which we call the local government units, and that would be the smallest unit of our government. So the best way, or as the previous speaker said, was to send this to the one who's, let's say, the nearest one for the site or the most involved party for the conservation effort. So that would be the local government unit in our country. But then it's also part of the government. And then here comes also the challenge with regards to, for example, the Philippines. We have a very few number of experts and scientists, and we are divided in different islands. So the empowering or hiring or immediately hiring experts from local communities is quite the challenge, especially if the selected sites will not have a local expert. Yeah, so that is also one challenge. So I think, for example, in the case of my country, what would be a best option to ensure proper resource utilization in a conservation project would be screening for site selection before the allotment of funds, to ensure that the local government and the communities would be really able to utilize the funding to its maximum capacity. For the stratified budget allocation, I'd love the idea. However, we really need to ensure for that to, because it's a logistics problem. I think it's a logistical challenge. If we would wait for the report, for the accomplishment report of a conservation site before we allot it, before we allot the next set of funding, so that would be a challenge with regards to marrying your targets for, let's say, for your annual targets for that site, and then the resource allocation, because ideally we do projects for 1 year, 3 years, and 5 years. So that's also a logistical challenge with regards to the stratified budget allocation. I think also, if should we be able to also for example, budget allocation, because these types of things, these conservation projects involve memorandum of agreements, memorandum of understandings. This has a lot of contract signings involved. So, for example, maybe in Africa it would be possible, but for example, in my country, immediately shifting a certain budget to another potential conservation site just because one site didn't really achieve their targets for the year would be really hard. So yeah, so that would be that would be the challenge uh for the resource allocation that I see. And another thing would be um for involving the local communities further. Also, one thing that we should be able to look into, I think, especially for us developing countries, especially also in Latin America and Africa, would be the concept of citizen science, which is also part of capacity building, which is enabling the local communities to be scientists themselves in a way, so that in the future they'd be able to, to be either they be future scientists or they be competent enough to be able to manage their local resources, that they do not need external intervention anymore. So yeah.
Well, thank you. Can you please mention that phrase again in case we have mistaken it? The
Citizen
local
science.
scientists? Citizen, wow.
Yeah.
Citizen scientists. So thank you very much for your
Yeah, thank you.
contribution. And now we invite a participant from Africa. Right.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Dauda Abadauda. I agree with the previous speakers on the issue of, having equity distributions. But the problem is that we're having is that, especially in Africa, we have a good policies, but implementation is where we have issues. The reason why we have this issue with the implementation is because, lack of political wills from the government side. We have so many policies, coming from within and outside the countries, especially in Africa. But the problem is we have issue of political will, whereby certain fund allocated for, some specific projects, you find out that the project is being abandoned, but money was not there to be accounted for. So we have issue of accountability, like previous, speakers have said. But where we have this kind of issue, the reason why we have this kind of issue, because we have a policies, but this kind of policies, because we don't apply what we call evaluation, because we don't invite evaluators. This issue of M&E is very, very important, because M&E is a process whereby it will assess how the project will be, how, when, it has a time frame of that project. How are we going to achieve it? What is working and what is not working? What is needed to be improved? So, and evaluations experts must be involved. When we have a strong evaluation experts in any project that we want to execute, I promise us that such transparency in terms of distribution, it will be all right for a better sustainable world. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we welcome participants from Asia Pacific.
So we're having this really great discussion of just the role of politics in a discussion like climate change and just the environmental spectrum in general. And actually, so personally, I live in the U.S. and I mean, a lot of you may know our political spectrum here is, it's gone through a lot of changes recently. And we've definitely evolved in through politics, but something that I see happening here is that now there's this issue of just like how much of a strong role politics has. So politics is really brought into every single discussion now, and it's kind of become difficult for people to form, personally, I believe that it's become kind of difficult for people to form proper opinions about something because of the heavy role that politics plays. So for example, I was in another meeting yesterday and we were talking about how here in the US, I believe it's leftists that are very supportive of environmental change. And so for example, if I as a leftist try and tell someone who's not that maybe it would be a good idea to change from using plastic bags in a grocery store to using reusable bags, you know, because of the strong role that politics plays and because of just how involved everyone is in the political spectrum nowadays, someone could think like, oh, like, you know, she's a leftist, she's trying to impose her ideas on me, and they might mistake my suggestion for them to be more environmentally conscious as being a political suggestion. So I think that as our world progresses, it's going to be a lot harder for the youth in specific, because we are the ones that are kind of bringing our world forward in terms of issues like these. It's going to be very important, I think, of how we communicate these ideas and how we want to get different powers involved. So it's very obvious that we can't, it's going to be very difficult for us to kind of like let go of politics and move forward with such issues, because we do need the political spectrum. We do need our governments to, you know, help us fund our environmental projects. We need them to support our environmental projects because they are the ones that hold the most power in our nation. So if they support us, it's good for us. So we can't completely let go of them, but I think we just need to understand how to communicate with them because of the role that politics plays in our world today. And also in terms of just communicating with communities, we also need to make sure, like, nowadays we need to just understand that a lot of people are very involved in politics. A lot of people a lot of people's opinions are driven through their political points of view. So I think in terms of communication, effective communication, we need to understand that when we communicate with someone, we need to understand all the facts behind it. And I think someone was mentioning the importance of having a scientific knowledge, a scientific background of some sort, so that we can effectively make such communications in today's world. So I think that's just really important. And I think it's just important for us to realize that politics is important. We do need it. We just need to be able to kind of work together with it instead of working against it, because I think there's this like negative stigma surrounding politics. A lot of people think politics and they think like, oh, like it's scary, you know, like I don't know how to dabble in this, but I think we just need to understand it's important. And if we are to move forward with environmental issues in today's world, I think it's very important that we also have a political background as well and understand how to effectively communicate. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you for everyone that's been contributing contributions and questions and discussions about politics. I think that all the points that everyone has brought up is really great. So
Thank you so much. I absolutely agree that a lot of decisions should really be based upon scientific evidence instead of political viewpoint. Like combating climate change or wearing a mask during the pandemic should not be a politicized thing. It shouldn't be dependent on your political affiliation. It's just a very simple choice, a public policy choice based on scientific evidence. And even if, as we said before, even if we can't completely depoliticize those decisions, then at least we can try with all our might to build this political consensus on these issues. So we really appreciate your contribution. Do we have any other participants who would like to share their opinion? Okay, I see the participant of Marsat representing Asia Pacific wishes to speak. So we
Yeah,
will
hello.
invite him.
Yeah. Thank you for this again. So I guess I just want to expand on the topic since we're talking about, the environment and biodiversity. So since I'm part of IGEN, which is the International Genetically Engineered Machines competition, so a lot of our work, as well as my bachelor's, is regarding biotechnologies and synthetic biologies. So I wanted to try to gauge your opinion as well, and like the opinion of the majority of the people here in terms of how they think biotechnologies or synthetic biology could be used to mobilize these resources or to help tackle a lot of the issues that you guys might be facing. For example, in biodiversity specifically, you have things such as gene drives, as you guys might be aware of, which can be used to sort of control or suppress populations and regulate populations of various species. So a lot of people, for example, are working on mosquitoes, gene drives for mosquitoes to help combat malaria for them. And there's also a debate about that, is it well within our natural rights to sort of regulate populations of species like that? So do you guys think that NGOs at the ground level in Africa and South Asia have a role to play in sort of curating the discussion around synthetic biology, or is that something that should be restricted towards, or between scientists and politicians only? So I wanted to try to get the general idea of the people here, I guess.
A very interesting question.
Yeah, I'd like to say something about that, I guess.
Sure.
For me, the use of biotechnology, for example, the use of genetically modified mosquitoes. So to combat malaria, for me, in my opinion, that should be a last resort. Since we already have integrated pest management, and we also have other technologies or strategies to combat invasive alien species, as well as the control of other populations without the use of molecular techniques. I think that should be a last resort, especially for us here in developing countries. Implementation of those technologies would be hard, especially for the funding part. I think the for us in development, I'm not sure if I speak for the other developing countries as well, but for us, the thing that we need the most for biodiversity conservation right now is public awareness, and also the involvement of the public, and capacity building, as well as basic data for basic research. Because we really cannot conserve, or we cannot protect, or we cannot do various conservation strategies if we do not know what we have, or if we did or if we do not know what species we have, what ecosystems are existing right now, or do we even have pests, do we still have the malaria problem here in the Philippines? So those are the problems that we need to address right now. So for example, for me in the Philippines, we're not really at that level yet, I think, though we have pest management strategies to combat malaria and dengue, and other uh, other diseases that are brought about by arthropod vectors. The number one problem that we have right now, or the number one challenge that we have right now, is basic data for science. So that's the one thing that we need to be able to educate the public and the government as well, so that they would be able to formulate um, you know interventions or policy interventions on how to address um, problems that we are currently facing right now, especially especially those involved with the environment.
Thank you so much. It's really useful to remind all of us that the situation can be really different from region to region, and their priorities and corresponding solutions can be very different as well. And now we would like to remind you that according to our schedule, we only have 5 minutes left for our free discussion. So, dear participants, please grasp this last-minute opportunity to share your opinion, voice your stances and your thoughts. You can share your opinions. Yes, sure. Please unmute yourself.
So I guess I'll just follow up. And I actually understand a lot of the arguments you guys have presented. You know, there's again, someone I think in the chat mentioned that there's little to no trust for these technologies. And I think that is a fair place to come from because, you know, there's a lot of gray area there. Absolutely. And I think the best way, or I think the middle ground that we can reach is, as you mentioned, the honorable delegate before me, that we need more data, firstly, and we need to be very transparent with that data. I think at the moment there's a lack of transparency between scientific research and how it gets to the public, and that ambiguity sort of results in the conspiracies that we see today. If we can be incredibly transparent with that process and the data that we collect, I think we can learn to sort of, see what technologies we can trust and where we can make a compromise to sort of, have an integrated method to fix these issues. But yeah, those are my 2 cents on that.
Thank you very much. Any last minute thoughts or speech regarding previous speeches or your own opinion? Like to recap this very fruitful discussion, or to share with us some of your anticipations for the future of post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Anything is welcome.
Hello. My last minute statement as regards to biodiversity conservation and the post-2020 framework. I think the issue of biodiversity, nature, and the climate is felt globally, but looking back to grassroots and local communities, the answers lies there. And once all our answers are local, so looking globally and acting locally is the solution for us all. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. A very useful principle to bear in mind. Any last minute speech? It's literally the last minute. And you will be remembered for delivering this last minute speech by all of us.
I mean, I've spoken several. Oh, please go ahead.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for the contribution they've given, and like you guys have been very inspiring for me, especially as a student. And I think in order to move forward, I mean, we need to learn how to not be centrists. I think we need to find a progressive direction where we can move together and sort of figure out I think the best thing we can do right now is prioritize. I think we often forget how we have to prioritize a lot of our issues, right? And especially in terms of dealing with these things. And if we can learn how to prioritize these things, we figure out 50% of the crisis, I think. Again, this is something that is probably not going to affect a lot of us significantly towards the end of our lives, unfortunately. But for the generations to come afterwards, it's something that's pretty detrimental, especially for our countries. So Pakistan, for example, is 6th on the list of countries to be affected by climate change, global warming, and such issues. And your respective countries are at the brunt of this as well. So I think what we need to do is demand accountability, and actually, apart from just demanding for action, do whatever it takes, and intuitively to get these things, working on the ground and doing these things. And yep, I think you guys are doing a lot of amazing work. And again, thank you, Bruce, for this discussion. It's been amazing. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. We hope all of you have enjoyed it as much as we do. We really appreciate this wonderful discussion, and we will document the results, and we have documented the results of your discussion, and we'll put all of them into a kind of document or declaration of some sort, and we will present this document to the official IUCN summit, which takes place every 2 years. And this year is going to take place in France. So we're going to present the document, which is the consensus framework of our event, to the official summit. So it's really glad for us to know that even though this activity is completely organized by youth and participated by youth, but we have been able to make some contributions, however minor, however marginal they are. And I think that's the silver lining. We have participants of all expertise, really, and a lot of them with real life experiences to share with us some of their observations and insights. It's really useful to have this discussion, and we really appreciate it. And just like a trailer, we're gonna have, as I said in the very beginning, our event actually has 2 parts. So what took place just now is the very first part of our event, the new deal for nature, regarding the biodiversity conservation. And tomorrow at the very same time, we're going to discuss climate change, which is the second part of our activity. So if you have enjoyed our event, we hope that you have. Be sure to attend tomorrow's event as well. We assure you that it's going to be just as exciting and as inspiring, if not more inspiring, than today's one. And if you have any, and we will welcome your feedback as well, any positive feedbacks or any comments or any negative comments, we will welcome all of them so that we can improve our work better in the future. As you can see, yes, Maki has sent this link of the survey in our chat box. So if you would be kind enough to spend like a few minutes to fill in the survey, we would really appreciate it.
Hi, sorry, Bruce, I have a question.
I'm sorry, please go ahead, Samantha.
How can we access the document that will be, that you guys are gonna produce based on this session?
That's a very good question. I think we'll put up a Google Drive link on the web page of our activity.
Okay.
Which is where you access our event.
Ah, okay, okay, perfect.
Perfect.
All right,
But
thank
thanks
you.
for raising this question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you as well.
Is it possible for everyone to share their LinkedIn so we can sort of connect afterwards as well? Is that possible?
Sorry, could you please repeat that question?
Is it possible for everyone to sort of share their LinkedIn so we can connect as well afterwards? Because I think
You mean share the link of this meeting with others?
No, like the LinkedIn, like their profiles on LinkedIn, like their professional profiles. Yeah.
You mean right now in the chat box?
Yeah, sure. If they want to, or if they want to share it, yeah, I guess.
Yeah, of course, it's up to you. Yeah, you can of course share your information in this chat box. Yeah, and if you have filled this survey, or if you have any other business to attend to, then of course you can leave this meeting room. And again, we really enjoy this discussion, and we hope you a good day, a good night, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow at the same time. And wish you the very best with your work and your study. Good luck.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.